So Paul Henderson, Kevin's brother. I'll take that. Hopefully you guys like him. But I'm the resident weed guy, marijuana guy. For those that don't know, so I'm going to chat a little bit about that industry tonight. So it's also not lost on me why I was asked to speak today. Today is April 20th. For those that don't know, it's the International Consumption Day of Cannabis, right? So, and for the industry, it's our largest sales day of the year. So, in a couple hours, I'll get us some reports to figure out what's going on here in Utah with my stores. So, anyway, very exciting. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all about the email.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the email. So, there was an email that was just sent out. And it's got a bunch of slides that are going to kind of coincide with some of my stories because I don't have audio visual to kind of show you guys pictures that go along with my stupid stories. And so anyway, it's all in your email, and you can either take a look real quick now, or you can follow along when I get to that section of my talk. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through a little bit about my background very quickly, and let you guys know how I got here. And then I'm going to run through the history of the cannabis industry, and then tell you guys, kind of my experience in the cannabis industry over the last 8 years, and then wrap up with a couple of pieces of advice that I've kind of picked up over the years. And so, grew up in San Diego. Kevin, we're two of 6 kids in San Diego. Is fairly decent experience. I grew up Mormon and ended up going on a 2-year Mormon mission to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So I still speak a little Portuguese for anybody that speaks Portuguese here. So that was interesting. The only reason I mentioned that is because I ended up in my undergrad years as a freshman at 23 years old. So that was a lot of fun. But I ended up getting through school as fast as possible, right? Decided I knew what I wanted to do. And ended up getting through in 3 years, and then was fortunate enough to join Goldman Sachs, and ended up spending multiple years there. Ended up doing a 3-year analyst training program, and then did my MBA at Carnegie Mellon University, Tepper School of Business, for those that don't know. And they were one of the early that ended up doing remote stuff, which now seems normal, but back in 2008, that was not normal at all. So I got to take all my classes in a boardroom at Goldman Sachs with a couple of other corporate sites like United Technologies and Cisco Systems. So that was cool, and I leveraged that opportunity to leave Goldman and join General Electric, the capital business, when it still existed before they sold it off. But I ended up in a 2-year leadership program where I got to spend a lot of time with senior leadership, including Jeff Immelt, which was incredibly valuable. And then ended up at Apple. So Apple recruited me back to the Bay Area. And that was fascinating experience. Got to do a lot of new business development. And the only thing that I'll mention with this was my big corporate life. And as you guys can imagine, I was on the track, and my goal was to become a Fortune 500 CEO. And I ended up in weed. But that's so that's how I started out on the track, and things were going pretty well. I ended up randomly getting assigned to launch new businesses at each one of these big corporations. And so I didn't really realize it at the time, but it's happened over and over again. And so I got to kind of experience being able to research and decide and then pitch to kind of senior leadership about, hey, I think we should go this direction and do that. And so that was kind of my intro into kind of business, launching new businesses and startups and all that, although I had the backing of major corporations. Okay, so that brings us up to speed on kind of corporate life up to the cannabis space. But before I jump into that, I do want to just walk through a hypothetical situation so you guys can kind of all understand a little bit about my experience and what I went through. Okay, so let's all just say you guys are living in San Diego, California. San Diego announces and decides that they are going to issue cannabis licenses. Them as a city have decided they're going to go in, right? California has already legalized. And so, you decide, okay, hey, I'm entrepreneurial. Like, this is exciting. Like, I'm not doing too much right now. I want to dive in. Big industry, it's growing rapidly. And so you decide you're going to go look at all the rules, regulations. The first thing that you look at is real estate. So all of these cities basically confine all cannabis operations, or at least they did back in 2000, the early 16, 17, 18, into specific zones called like green zones. And so anyway, you get to work, you get out there, you end up finding a landlord that doesn't owe anything on the building because he can't lease to a cannabis tenant if he has a loan on the building. So it's got to be paid off. It's got to be the right type of building, industrial for cultivation or manufacturing, and then kind of retail focused for a retail store. You end up negotiating a lease because the law in San Diego says that you have to have a lease in place. It's not good enough to have a commitment. You actually have to sign a lease and start paying. And so unfortunately, the process that it takes a city to go through to issue licenses takes about 18 to 24 months. So you, because you've decided to go down this path, are committed to paying rent for the next couple of years. But you're still excited about it. You still want to go forward. You still want to do it. Okay, cool. So you apply for the licenses. San Diego issues you several licenses across the supply chain. Exciting. And now comes the fun part. So you've been in business, you've been in corporate, you know kind of how to piece together, different vendors and how to put the business together. But the challenges are now, payroll company won't work with you because you're in cannabis. Cool. Banks, you're not going to be able to borrow money to build out your facility because they're not going to lend to you. Okay, cool. You want to raise some equity? Great. But funds and investment firms won't give you equity because their LP bylaws state that they can't invest into anything illegal, which it's illegal at the federal level. So you can't go raise money from them. Okay, cool. Software platforms, HR platforms. Nope, they don't want to work with you either. And a lot of times it's not because they have rules, it's because the owners have moral obligations to what you're in. And so, that's the type of thing that you go through. And then social media companies, you can't advertise your business because Instagram, Meta, they won't promote illegal activities, so no chance in advertising. And then worst of all, if all those things suck, worst of all is that you realize that you are going to be taxed incredibly egregiously with a provision called 280E, which is a provision of the tax code that relates to drugs. And the history of this is, 280E is actually, you get taxed on gross margin, not on net income. You're not able to write off any traditional business expenses. And the history of this is actually interesting. It actually stems from the 80s in Miami when cocaine dealers were actually writing off their yachts and their exotic cars. And the IRS basically said, hey, cool, we know you're selling cocaine. You can write off your COGS, what it costs you to buy the cocaine. You just can't write off anything else for your business. And so that law has been on the books since the 80s, and we're still subject to it, even though the states legalize and actually go through this formal process. And so cool. So you're sitting there, you throw your hands up and you go, are you serious? Like, what is going on? This is crazy. I'm paying, I just signed rent. I'm going to pay crazy taxes. The state legalized, my city legalized. And the response is, that's cool. Tell somebody who cares. You're now a drug dealer. Congratulations. So that's the experience. Okay, so how do we get here, right? How do we get to that moment? I'm going to walk you through about 110 years of history of cannabis very quickly. So 1913 is actually in California specifically, and I'm going to talk mostly about California just because they were a lot of the first, and a lot of my experience over the last 8 years has actually been in California. So 1913 is actually the Poison Act in California, which actually made it illegal to sell cocaine and opiates. Well, it was amended in 1913 to add cannabis to that. Okay, cool. Fast forward to 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act is actually created. And this was a federal law, and it basically prohibited all sorts of drugs. Cannabis was added to that. This is interesting. It stems from the Mexican, what was it? Let me get it right. The Mexican Revolution in 1910. And after that, there was a bunch of immigration of Mexicans into the United States. And there was actually backlash from Americans saying that we do not want this immigration. We do not want Mexicans into the United States. Sound familiar? And basically they said that what they're doing is they're bringing their marijuana with them, and they're turning them and the Americans into violent lunatics. Literally. And if you guys have ever heard of Reefer Madness, there was some films and things about that. This is all where it stems from, is like this era. And if you also want to know about why we don't generally say the word, from an industry perspective, say the word marijuana, is because of kind of the racist undertones of this era. So we mostly call it cannabis. Now, we'll recognize the names and all that, but that's the reason why we don't generally use that term anymore. Okay, so that was 1937. 1970 was the Controlled Substance Act, also at the federal level, and replaced the Marijuana Tax Act. And this actually was much more stringent with drugs, and it broke drugs into 5 different categories, which are ripe for abuse with medical, like different categories of medical uses. And I'm going to skip over this in a second. I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail in a moment. But 2 years later, funny enough, 1972 was the first time that California tried to actually pass medical cannabis in the state. And it went okay, but it did not pass with 34% of the vote at that time. So 1972. So then fast forward to 1996. Many of you may be aware that this is actually when California runs Proposition 215 and actually passes a medical cannabis bill to legalize the state of California. So they were the first in the country to legalize. And that passed with 56% of the vote. And so in 2010, California also attempted to be the first state to legalize for recreational use. And while it had a lot of early support, the Democratic Party decided not to endorse the bill, and so it ended up failing with 46% of the vote. Go ahead. And then 2 years later, 2012 is what many of you may remember, especially if you live in one of these states. But that's when Washington and Colorado ended up legalizing for adult use. Those are the first 2 states that ended up legalizing, and then it was kind of all over the news. And I'd be surprised if many of you did not hear a little bit about that. And then 2016 is when California had another crack at the ballot of legalizing through Prop 64 recreational use, and then it passed at that time with 56% of the vote to then be implemented January 1st, 2018. And then I'm going to just fast forward to current day today. Pretty much there's not an election that goes by that there's not some type of cannabis bill on at the polls. The biggest of which this fall is actually the state of Florida. So Florida is voting for recreational use for those that live in the state and didn't know. But they've been a medical state for a while, but one of the largest states in the country, and it's a really big deal in the industry. And then there are 38 states currently that have some type of cannabis law on the books, mostly medical, and 24 of those states have laws for recreational use. And so it just seems like it's all moving in one direction, it's all chipping away, and eventually it's going to be every single state. Okay, so let's go back to 1970, the Controlled Substance Act. So they broke the drugs down into 5 different schedules. Schedule 1 was basically the most ripe for abuse and also no known medical benefit. So these drugs included ecstasy, heroin, LSD, and cannabis, which is kind of funny to say, but that's where it was established at the time. Schedule 2, funny enough, is actually meth, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, Vicodin, oxycodone, and Adderall. And then Schedule 3 is things like ketamine, testosterone, and then Schedule 5 is like cough suppressants, to give you an idea of the range. So it's kind of silly, right? Well, with cannabis and all the known medical benefits and what's going on. But again, we're talking about 50 years ago, right? There was no research, but cannabis has been living at the Schedule 1 drug level for the last 50 plus years. And unfortunately, it hasn't been changed. But you guys may actually see in the news here very soon that this will be rescheduled from 1 to 3. So HHS at the federal level has already provided their recommendation to the DEA to move cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So what does that mean? It's not a federal legalization move. It's simply a rescheduling that helps the industry in significant ways. One, 280E, the overburdensome tax regulation goes away. So a lot of these big cannabis companies, if you follow them, are kind of been waiting for this day because they're dealing with crazy taxes. And then number 2, it actually opens up all of the banking. So not just depository, because over the last several years, we've had banks step up and actually accept your cash into a bank account. But every single service beyond that is pretty much off the books. So you can't get a line of credit, you can't get a loan from a bank, you can't really do anything other than just deposit your money and write checks and do wires. So it's a pretty big deal, and it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of months. The reason that it's coming up now is this was a promise from Biden on the campaign trail 4 years ago, and he's trying to make good now before the election this fall, and he's trying to appease to some of the younger demographic that he wants to vote for him, which he thinks this move will actually really invigorate that voter base. So that's what happened with the schedules. Okay, so let's go back to our hypothetical. You won these licenses and you decide that you want to be super aggressive. You don't want to just open a retail store or a cultivation site. You want to be fully vertically integrated. So everything from growing all the way to sales through the retail store. Well, congratulations. You now need to become an expert in genetics, agriculture, oil extraction from plants, CPG manufacturing, logistics, and retail. Any one of which could take you a lifetime to become an expert at, but you got to just put your head down and get to work. And so that takes us to basically my experience in the cannabis industry, which starts in 2016 in California. I end up leaving Apple and joining a company called Indus, which is now, it's in Monterey County. It's now known as Lowell Farms. They've gone through a couple of different iterations and mergers. And this was an interesting experience, right? It was the time that we didn't know if recreational was going to pass, and so we were still operating under the kind of medical aspect of the law of California. And so let me give you a couple of stories and a couple of experiences here. I leave Apple, where I was managing a global team, and I'm in Monterey County with my small little cannabis team, and the first day, the CEO walks in and says, "Hey, we're being sued for securities fraud by an current investor." Awesome. And so it ended up getting thrown out of court because of the arbitration clause. But when an investor files a lawsuit, or anybody files a lawsuit, especially alleging securities fraud, the SEC perks up. And right, cannabis is kind of hot and sexy and interesting. And somebody that wants to make a name for themselves is like, hey, we should dig into this. And so the SEC decides to then jump in and investigate. And if anybody's been through that, it's just a nightmare. And it's ultimately ended up becoming nothing, but it took a ton of time and a ton of money, right? As you guys are aware with lawyer fees. So that was, yeah, for the lawyers in here. So that was day number one. Then I also realized shortly after that when I was interviewing, I was asking the right questions. I knew what to check into. How much money have you guys raised? Do you have in the bank? What's your burn rate? Things like that. And I was told, okay, we just raised $1.8 million. Our burn rate is 100 grand. Like, oh, okay, amazing. I got 18 months to come in as the CFO and figure out how to really make this work. Well, it turns out that they had already spent 900 grand of the 1.8 million, right? So that was gone. So there was 900 grand in the bank, and the CEO actually had no idea what the burn was. It was actually 300,000, not 100,000. So anyway, you're sitting there going, all right, this is interesting. Now we got 3 months to figure this out. We end up basically understanding the margins and what was going on and what they were paying for oil. This was an edibles manufacturer and a distributor in California. And it's important to note that there really were no legit distributors at this time in California. Everybody that grew or made products just self-distributed to the stores, mostly locally. And so this was a really big deal. And we ended up realizing we had to vertically integrate. We had to actually plant and grow ourselves. We had to extract. Otherwise, the margins were never going to make sense, and this was not a viable business going forward. So we ended up raising, I think, about $5 million at the time. We ended up buying a greenhouse. And the presentation that was sent out to you, it kind of goes in chronological order from 2016 to present day. And so you'll see some photos of those greenhouses and what we had to do to convert them to be able to grow cannabis in Monterey County. And so anyway, wild experience. Well, a few months later, November of 2016, this was my first experience in understanding that one bad decision can destroy your reputation. We ended up in Las Vegas at a large industry conference, and the CEO of the company I was working for came from hospitality, and they used to do all sorts of crazy shit, I guess, and it's normal. And so we decided to throw this party at the Palms Hotel in one of their mega suites, and it's affectionately known as Meatgate now. And so he basically decided to hire a mostly naked woman to lay on a table for people to pick food off of her to eat, like sushi, like you see in the movies. Well, because we didn't have sushi, they decided to put like cold cut meats on her, and it was like so gross and disgusting. And then it ended up becoming a PR nightmare. We had to hire a bunch of people, firms, to help us manage through this process. Nobody knew except him that he was going to do this. And it was just one of those like, what am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, I just left Apple and now I'm dealing with stuff like this, right? So you'll see a photo in there of what it looks like. I'm sorry, please don't share this or send it around because that photo has never seen the light of day, but it is what it is. So fast forward a couple of more months. I mean, now you guys are seeing it, right? So it's not on Twitter, please. God. Okay, so then a couple months later, January of 2017, I get a call and they basically say, hey, our distribution driver dropping off some products in San Diego was just held up at gunpoint, handgun to his head, robbed of 60 pounds of flour, which, give you an idea, at the time was worth about $175,000. Basically, but it was an inside job, right? This is what we were dealing with in 2016 and 17. Somebody from the store knew that he was coming with this product that they agreed to buy as a store. They called their buddy followed him in, came out in mass with guns, right to his head, took his product, they took off, went to the cops. Man, they don't care, right? It's cannabis, right? You're a drug dealer. So that was, again, another interesting story. I was only there for about 16 months. That was my first 6 months in cannabis, by the way. So if you can imagine, right? These little stories and experiences, just absolutely insane. So anyway, I ended up deciding to move and ended up becoming the CEO of a company called Grupo Flor, which actually was a crosstown rival in Monterey County. They had won licenses across the supply chain, much like our hypothetical example. They had tried to raise money, but it was a couple of lawyers, and real estate guys. They'd never raised money, launched a business, didn't know what they were doing. And so I ended up coming in, raising about $20 million and getting to work. And we basically built the entire supply chain for them. But this time it actually included retail stores, which the first company did not. And so that was pretty fascinating. Lots of fun and crazy experiences. The pictures with like Snoop and others in the deck come from kind of this era. So 2018, 17 and 18, the recreational use had passed in California, had not been implemented until 2018. But what that meant was a ton of excitement, a ton of people throwing money at the space, right? So I call this era like shooting fish in the barrel. This company, I ended up taking from basically non-existent to 75 million in revenue in 2.5 years. And so if anybody kind of has an idea, like that's ridiculous. And it's fun and exciting, but also to keep up with growth like that is incredibly challenging. And so a couple of fun experiences in this at Grupo Flor was that in this era, everybody was super excited. There was a couple of international locations that were doing interesting things. So one of those was Colombia. Colombia had actually passed laws for medical cannabis. And so I was invited down to Colombia from the mayor of Cali, Colombia. And if you guys have watched Narcos, the Cali cartel, right? Okay. So ended up having the opportunity to head down to Colombia and spend some time. And mostly the governor was looking for U.S. companies that had experience in cannabis to invest into Colombia. So we toured partners, grow sites, everything you can imagine. So incredibly fascinating experience with that. And one of the coolest things I did was got to do a nighttime walking tour of downtown Cali, which nobody gets to do, only because we were surrounded by the governor's guards. They were all armed, because Cali is still a bit dangerous with the FARC, which is a cartel in South Colombia. So anyway, super cool, super interesting time period. And then the other thing I got to do is end up going to Mexico. And this was at the invitation of the Agriculture Commission, a commissioner from the country of Mexico. We go down there. In Mexico at the time was actually running through all sorts of recreational use possibilities in their Congress. At the time, it looked like it was about to be passed. It since has not passed yet. It's just crazy. But at the time, they were getting ready to ramp up. And so I got the chance to go down to Mexico and spend some time there. And one of the most interesting things was a lunch meeting with the head of a Mexican cartel from northern Mexico that basically represented a bunch of guys that grew cannabis. So remember the old Mexican brick reed, if you guys have been around for a while, used to come across the border into the US. Well, these guys were the guys that grew all that, and they, funny enough, that they wanted to grow better cannabis to be able to support the Mexican industry. And so our entire conversation, brokered between the agriculture commissioner and a drug cartel, was around how do we as my company come down and provide the genetics to the cartel members to grow better cannabis to then insert into the Mexican ecosystem. And so incredibly fascinating, wild, and a ton of fun. Okay, so that was Grupo Flor. That takes us up through about 20, let's see. Oh, and sorry, I actually forgot one other thing. I also ended up at a ranch 3 hours outside of Mexico City, which was owned by the Carlos Slim family, together with a gentleman with the name of Fontanet, which is the largest home builder in Mexico, because they were interested also in entering the cannabis space once it legalized. And what I did not know at the time was they had an entire bull fighting training arena on their ranch and property. And I, as the idiot I am, because I had no idea about bullfighting, was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like, I would love to see some live action like bullfighting. They rallied the troops, and in 20 minutes, there was a guy on a horse with a bull in the arena. I didn't know they killed the bull at the end of these things, right? That was so like my bad. I killed a bull on my trip to Mexico. So anyway, that was, again, another just one of those wild, like, pinch me moments in the cannabis space and some experience I've been able to have. I ended up joining as the CEO of High Times Magazine. So anybody know High Times from back in the day? All right, a few of you. So it was launched in 1974. So basically 50 years old this year. Spent the last 3.5 years basically running that company, and it was interesting because they were in a world of hurt. We needed to kind of change the strategy. We needed to figure out what to do. But they were a media company and an events company, and they had been since the beginning. They were a top 10 globally distributed magazine in the world, right? Think about all the magazines that have existed in the world at the height in the 90s. Top 10 distributed, 5 million subscriptions around the world. Which is fascinating because whenever I went to any place and had a conversation, everybody had a story about they went to boarding school in Panama and they had their High Times magazine under their mattress when they were 14 years old next to the Playboy. Like, it just every place I went was some story like that, which is interesting. But we basically decided, what do we have to do to kind of pivot and change this industry, right? Media is kind of dying, right? Advertising revenue, that whole business model was dying. And then events. High Times revenue was 90% event revenue, live event revenue. So it was the Cannabis Cup events. It was crowning the best weed in every market, throwing a weekend festival, and announcing the winners of the best weed. And basically, people built their businesses off of the reputation of High Times and the judging that we would do with our experts. And so it was a really big deal. And so when COVID hit, all that went away. And so I'm there sitting in April of 2020 going, well, this whole business is basically dead. What do we do? And so we decided to basically take the IP and the strength of the brand name and move into other things, like into the plant touching space. So when we say that, we mean actually into the growing, into the retail stores. And so in the deck, you'll see some stores that have the High Times name on it. That just gives you an example. Ended up opening 8 stores over the last couple of years in the California market. And then we ended up licensing the brands internationally, all over the place, for everything you could think of. Clothes, skateboards, necklaces, calendars. Everybody that wanted to launch a weed product wanted to use the High Times name. And so we were able to attend the Las Vegas licensing show, the only cannabis company that's ever been invited since. And we were more popular. We were right next to Universal, Disney, et cetera, and we were the most popular booth in the entire show in Las Vegas because of the stories and the experiences that everybody had. So that was kind of my days at High Times. I actually, sorry, I'll take it back. One more thing, which is kind of sombering, but kind of gives you an idea of what you have to deal with in this space. In 2021, in October, our head of security is a former captain of the Oakland Police Department, and we actually had 2 stores in Oakland. And what happened was he ended up leaving one of our stores. He was followed by a couple of guys. He was getting gas on his way to the Oakland airport. Pulls up. On the other side of the gas stall, 4 guys pull up. 3 of them get out of the car. Looks like they're pumping gas. They come over. They point a gun at him and basically say, start giving me your stuff, right? Jewelry, rings, watches, everything. Okay, cool. But they know he's kind of in cannabis because they followed him from the store. But he's also a former Oakland, right, police captain. He has concealed carry, which, if you know California, is actually very challenging to get that. And so, anyway, these guys pull guns. He actually has an assault rifle in his trunk at the time. And the guys basically, one of the guys tells the other guys to, hey, go grab whatever you can out of the trunk. He knew that if they got into the trunk, it would turn into a disaster. And so he has a split second. He backs up and he fires and kills the guy right in front of him, right in the chest, 20-year-old kid from Stockton. And then the other guys just unleash fire. So he's basically in a full-fledged firefight on a Friday at noon in Oakland. Absolutely insane. He ends up getting shot 11 times. And fortunately enough, 11 holes in and 11 holes out. No arteries, no bones, no organs. And he was back to work in 2 weeks. And so it's just one of those surreal moments, one of the best people I've ever met in the world. And that's the type of thing you deal with. And since then, Oakland has actually gotten a whole lot worse. So if you guys follow the news. Okay, so that was High Times. During that time in High Times, I didn't really realize it at the time, but I kind of looking back on my experience, it was one of those times where myself and my COO at the time, we just kind of said yes to everything. And I'm not saying this is great advice to follow. It's actually not, but anytime anybody would invite us to go do anything, to experience something, we would just say, yeah, sure, we're in. You know, speaking at a conference in Panama, sure, we're in. We just do it. So, but what was interesting is looking back and saying yes actually put us in some really interesting and stupid situations. So I'll name off just a couple of random. Hanging out until 4 a.m. in a music studio with Migos, hanging out backstage at concerts with Snoop, in a partnership with weed with Wiz Khalifa, smoking blunts with Mike Tyson in his office in El Segundo, hanging out with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Matt Barnes, who, if you ever follow Matt Barnes as a former King and Laker, he was high on every single game, and he only admitted it afterwards. But he loved the weed so much that he joined the industry after. He's an amazing dude. And then getting to spend some time where CJ Wallace, Biggie's son, was given the key of the city, and I got a chance to fly out to New York with Mayor Adams and actually experience that moment. So it was pretty exciting. Okay, so that's all kind of California. That's weed. During all this time, I actually ended up meeting my current business partner here in Utah for the Beehive businesses, so Beehive Pharmacy. I met him here locally, and we decided to apply. I was going to be an advisor. I was taking, 1% in the company to just kind of help navigate that because I was still, working at High Times. And once we started writing the applications for the Utah medical market, he decided that I was much more valuable, and I became a co-founder with a lot more equity at that point in time. But in Utah, Utah has a medical program. This is unique. A lot of people are surprised to realize that. Utah's super conservative. But in 2020, the voters took it to the ballot, and they actually ended up passing the law. And so the state begrudgingly decided that they had to they had to follow the rules and the law, and they put together a whole program. And so we ended up winning 2 of the 15 retail licenses in the state of Utah. So entire state, 3.5 million people, 15 licenses. This is one of the best cannabis markets in the country that nobody knows about. It's amazing. And what I mean by that is super limited license, right? 15 retail stores. So we received 1 of 3 in Salt Lake County, it's just west of here. And then 1, which is about an hour north in a city called Brigham City. We did not end up winning a cultivation license, which is a long story, but we were the first loser. 8 licenses granted, we came in 9th place. But ultimately, we ended up, a friend of mine ended up winning a cultivation license and did not win retail. And I ended up contacting him saying, hey, you have any interest in selling us your license? And they actually said yes. There's a company out of Arizona called Harvest Health and Wellness. And we ended up purchasing that license, which was not more than a warehouse and some plants for $5 million. So that ninth place finish cost us $5 million. And so we got to work though. We got to work building with the stores here, and incredible market, a ton of fun. I decided to exit High Times in August of last year. So I walked away. I live in Utah because of Beehive, because when the pandemic hit in California in the Bay, I didn't want to be there anymore. I moved out here where things were a little bit more relaxed. And that kind of started the journey with the Utah operations. But before I left High Times, there was an interesting scenario. High Times was merging with a company called Moxie out of Long Beach. And before the merger was complete, there actually was about $1.5 million that had to be paid off from a senior secured lender, right? As we merged, there couldn't be two senior secured, so they decided that they were going to take one out. And the Utah asset that Moxie had launched, was the manufacturing business, was the thing that made the most sense to peel off and sell out to raise the money to go pay off that senior lender. And so the chairman of High Times pinged me and said, hey, we're in this situation. I know you have stuff in Utah. Are you interested in buying the pure Utah processing? And I said, yeah, maybe. And he said, I'll give you a smoking deal on it. You got to close in 10 days. Like, not LOI in 10 days. You got to close and wire the money in 10 days. And I was like, okay. So I ended up calling a couple of friends, a couple of investors who I'd made some money for, and I had kind of the commitment for 1.5 million in 30 minutes. I called them back, said, okay, let's do this. And so that basically completed the full vertical in Utah, right? Cultivation, manufacturing, 2 retail stores. Good.
Who else did you call to help?
Oh, also called SMB Law to do the legal work over Memorial Day weekend. So thanks, Kevin. So anyway, the only reason I got in, you guys all buy businesses, the only reason that this was possible is because I had met the team, I knew what they were doing, I understood the market incredibly well. It was still a massive risk and a challenge, but I was willing to take it on because I bought the business for 1 times EBITDA. Like, it just, right, it's silly, right? So ended up with a ton of equity in that business from day one, and I'm basically 2 months away from paying off those original investors that, by the way, here are the terms for cannabis companies if you're interested. A 1-year note, 20% annualized interest, and had to give them equity, which amounted to 25% of the company. So because I can't go to the SBA, because I can't borrow like money, right? So anyway, I'm very envious of all those of you doing deals with SBA debt, and I very much look forward to my future that includes things like that. Okay, so that's Beehive. Sorry. All right, that's a pure Utah brand. So that's how I kind of entered into this whole, like, I've done about a couple $100 million in M&A, but I'd always done it for other companies, other groups. So I was familiar with the process. Pure Utah processing was the first time that I did it for myself, right? Much like many of you guys. Okay, so enough with that. Those are my experiences in cannabis. You can see all the photos in the deck that I sent out. But I do want to start with kind of 5 pieces of advice that I try and live by, and then I'll circle back to some of the cannabis stuff. First point is start with your why, right? Many of you know who Simon Sinek is, and the first time that I ever saw his talk around this, I've tried to live that principle ever since. For those of you that don't know, he talks about people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So for example, if you own a coffee shop, right, your why isn't selling coffee, your why is creating an environment that's fun and exciting for the community to get behind and actually have interesting conversations, and you happen to sell coffee. And so the why, it dictates everything that you do outward focus in your brand, right? So your website, your social media, your newsletter, everything has to be kind of in line with what your why is and what you've identified. And so many of you operators may already have that, you know what you're doing, but those of you who are searching for businesses, be thinking about that. Be thinking about once you find the business and really get in, first of all, why are you searching for a business? But then 2, when you actually find that business to buy, what is your why? For us, and I'll relate this to, example here in Utah with Beehive, my partner is an Iranian immigrant and was basically told to toe the straight line. He was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when he was 12 years old. And he spent from basically 12 to 19 on an infusion therapy, trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And then ultimately ended up finding cannabis and ended up basically getting off of every single med that he was on, and has since been able to treat, he's 33 now, been able to treat that diagnosis with cannabis. And the education that he had to put himself through by going to other states while living in Utah, buying and experimenting, ended up translating into him basically helping a ton of people here in the state of Utah, including a lot of legislators, hence the reason why we ended up with some licenses here. And so our why for Beehive when we started was really around his experience, and it was around providing the best medicine for patients available where Western medicine has failed them. And so everything that we do, and many times in detriment to us as business owners, is with our patient hat on first, with our business owner hat on second. Okay, piece of advice number 2. The infinite game, right? Business is an infinite game. And so unlike a finite game where there's a clear winner and loser, the name of the game of business is stay in business as long as humanly possible, right? I think we all kind of get that. And so, part of that is building incredibly strong relationships. And so that's with your customers, that's with your employees. It's so easy nowadays with so many tools to sit behind a computer screen and run your entire business without ever exiting behind the computer screen, right? And many of you can do that. But what's really interesting is getting out and getting to meet people, sitting down face to face, talk about their families, talk about their interests, and just getting to know people and building those relationships. And that's going to help you in build your company in a more sustainable way. And so maybe the most important thing that, if you guys can take away one thing from me tonight, is that people do business with people, right? That's it. Like, remember that if you don't want to come to a conference like this, but you decide to do it, this is the environment where like magic happens, things actually happen. I met my partner Bijan in the Beehive business actually at a conference very much like this, 200 people, which happened to be at Powder Mountain, about an hour up the road here, where we kind of leased out the whole resort. It was cannabis executives. I met him in a buffet line for food, like right here. And he was the only person at the conference from Utah. I happened to live in Utah and went to undergrad here, so we just got to chatting. I didn't even know what was going on with the legislation in Utah. We got to talking for 2 hours. That translates into me helping with applications, becoming a co-founder, me moving to Utah, and completely changed my life, right? So there's so much that can happen at places like this. So building those strong relationships can help a lot. Point number 3, leaders eat last, right? You as business owners really need to create a culture where your employees feel comfortable, your partners feel comfortable to ask questions, to throw around ideas. And a lot of times that means you sit in the room and you just shut up and you listen. And so it's really interesting because a lot of people have a hard time with this, right? You're a business owner, you got all the ideas, you're the smartest person in the room, but fostering that culture will get you so much further for the people that are in that room that feel super safe and comfortable actually helping out and providing details. And then that includes investing in employee growth. And the employees are your growth, right? And so spending time and being very deliberate about what it means to actually invest into the growth of your employees, and you'll end up finding that it really comes back, tenfold to you. For an example, when I was at Grupo Flor, the second cannabis company, I had been through a couple of leadership and rotational programs, as I mentioned, at Goldman Sachs and GE. And so we ended up creating the first ever rotational program in cannabis, right? We had licenses across the supply chain. And so when we had somebody come into this program, they would rotate every 3 months through 4 different business units. And at the end of 1 year, depending on what our need was and what their interests were and what they were good at, we would then place them into one of those businesses. So easy, quick example of what that looks like. And then also something maybe controversial, but I've heard it kind of both ways, was when I bought Pure Utah Processing, the guy that runs the lab has a decade of experience. And in cannabis, that's kind of invaluable, right? Extracting oils and all that experience. I ended up giving him and one other key employee 5% of the company, like in week 1. And that's not done a whole lot in SMB, but it kind of takes a page out of the tech playbook of like Apple and Google and those guys, of like keeping your employees around, keeping them loyal. It's on a vesting schedule over 3 years. So it's like, hey, If they're, they should stick around for that period of time if they want to reap all that reward. But I thought it was super beneficial. Now, I understand there's both sides of the aisle, and I've heard some things at this conference that talks about doing that, but I've had other conversations with other SMB owners that are like, no, I would never do that. I want to own the whole thing. So I don't know. I'm just telling you my experience that I think it's very much worth it, especially if you have super key employees in the company that you buy. And then the fourth point is embracing the why of failure. So we're all going to do things, not failing companies. I hope nobody's company fails here, but let's just say that you launch a new product and it just doesn't go the way expected. Sitting down and actually having the conversation about why that didn't happen the way that you thought it was. Were the assumptions off? You went into the wrong geography. The product didn't align with your why or your core values as a company. There's a lot of reasons why, but distilling that with your team and understanding why is super critical in being able to grow as a business. And then actually not just understanding it, but then actually talk about it. And don't be afraid to talk about the failures and what you learned and what you're going to change going forward. So if it's a new product introduction, maybe there's now a lot more research or more specific research in a certain area that you need to get done before you launch the product. And hopefully that makes it much more successful down the line. And then fifth piece of advice, the power of trust, right? So trust is really built through consistency, right? Consistent messaging, behavior, values. The one thing that I always mention here is, and it sounds super stupid and ridiculous, but the one thing that I always focus on is always being on time to meetings for myself, right? For me, that was like the easiest and simplest thing to do that might have the largest impact. It shows that you value the other person's time, whether or not it's an employee, a prospective customer, a current customer. But again, consistency and things like that help build your reputation. And then delegate with trust. And this is kind of a hard one, right? But you're eventually going to grow to the size where you're going to have to be able to delegate some of your tasks to different individuals and different people. And so not just simple tasks, but actually big conversations. And being able to delegate really shows a ton of trust in those people, and that'll actually pay a ton of dividends for you. And in fact, I would say that if you are the smartest person in the room as the business owner at your company, you've probably failed yourself, right? You want, as the owner, you buy, but then you constantly look at securing the best talent that you can possibly recruit and that you can find. And then you let them get to work and work with you. And a lot of times they'll do amazing work for you. And if you happen to be thinking that, yeah, okay, but those people are successful, they got a lot of opportunities, and they might leave me, soon after a year or two. And I kind of say, yeah, okay, so what? Like, you should be their biggest champion when they come to you and talk about that they're moving on to the next venture. They're launching their own thing. They're going to work for somebody else. You want to be their biggest champion. You want to support them. And I guarantee you this will pay dividends years into the future for you by being that voice and that support and being a mentor to somebody like that leaves your company. Okay, and then those are the 5 pieces of advice. The last one that I kind of had thought about and didn't add as number 6 was don't be afraid to ask for help. For those operators, they understand it. For the searchers, may not know, but being a CEO of a company, even a small company, is incredibly lonely at the top. You don't have a lot of people to go to. You don't have a lot of advice. And so, you come to things like this. You meet people that are in the same space that you can rely on, that, hey, I don't have experience in this area, but you can really, really help me out in this spot. And so what I did, not what I did, but what I'm part of is we have as simple as a WhatsApp group with 150 of the top cannabis executives in the world, all constantly on WhatsApp, hundreds of messages a day, people asking for help. They need a letter for this. Some of us are direct competitors in states, and we still do this to help each other, but a lot of us are not, right? We're in different markets. Every state in the US might as well be its own country. It's so different. And so we generally don't have any issue helping improve. And then, of course, there are the other countries like Germany just launching and those guys needing help with what they should be doing. And so it puts you out there, and whatever you give, you end up getting back. But there are local meetup groups, those conferences, and whatever industry you end up buying into, of just getting out there and asking people's opinions on things, and just don't have the ego that you know everything, and really ask for that help if you need it. Okay, so let's go back to our hypothetical situation. you're kind of shell shocked. You just realized all these things are going on. It's incredibly difficult for you to kind of set up this business in San Diego, but you end up going to some local meetups. You end up going to some conferences. You meet people that are in the same industry. And those people end up telling you that, oh, hey, there's this obscure payroll company in Missouri that actually will bank cannabis. Okay, cool. Go sign up with them. There's a bank in the Northwest that's piloting a program for cannabis companies. Okay, cool. You contact them and try and get an account to do your deposits. There's an HR platform that was built specifically for cannabis, although it's clunky and expensive. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go sign up for them. And so you start to piece together through your network the vendors that will actually work with you, and you put together your business and you launch and you're off to the races. All right, and that's about it. So in closing, the five pieces of advice I'll just cover again. And I forgot to mention at the beginning that I basically heard every single one of these in the talks that happened in this conference today. So I thought this was good, kind of distilling it down and just kind of reminding you guys, start with your why, play the infinite game. You guys eat last, leaders eat last, embrace the why of failure, and then also the power of being able to trust in other people. So anyway, I could have talked about a million things, but that's kind of cannabis industry in a nutshell and my experiences. Happy to stay up here as long as you guys want to answer questions from here on out. So I'll stop with that.